we have people say, yeah, but you know what? We need to tone down the rhetoric. We've gone too far.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like they're waiting for the next attack. And then they're waiting for the next attack. And people, this time, everybody saw this. This time the protests around the world reached numbers that were unprecedented. But it took over 200 people to be killed for this to happen. That's too late. To stand up and protest after Israel killed all these people is too late. We should have saved them.
1, 2, 3. From Maffick Podcasts, Left Bitches.
All right. I'm Erica Marable.
I'm Anissa Nawe.
I'm Amanda Getty.
I'm Ryan Wentz.
And I'm Gregory Haddock. Sometimes they let me talk.
Shut up,
Greg.
Shut up, Greg.
Shut up.
New episodes weekly. Join Patreon for tasty leftovers.
No, it's not going no. So lame.
Let's try that again, Greg.
Hey bitches, before we get started today, Greg and I have been working on a little project that we wanted to tell you guys about.
Yes, very excited about it, and we'll just let the cat out of the bag. This is actually the first time we're publicly making any kind of promotion for it, so it really is coming up super, super soon.
Coming out as Party of One-ers.
Party of Oneers. Or did we just create like a new, are we trending right now? Is that how that works?
No, we're not trending right now.
I'm
Greg.
new to the internet.
We're not trending. We're not trending, Greg.
But you could help us.
You can help us trend.
Yeah. So this show is Party of One, and it's all about how Democrats and Republicans, a lot of people will say they don't agree on anything, and it'd be really nice if they just agreed on more stuff. And Amanda and I really approached this 6-part series kind of answering that question, saying, yeah, well, they do. And
you don't want to know what happens if they agree on more than they already do. Let's just put it that way.
All bad news. Bad news.
It's a searing critique on capitalism, on the American political system, on our two-party system, and it will fuck you up. So that's a recommendation.
Yeah, and we talked to a lot of really great people. We're super excited about it. Some really, really heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And our very own Ryan Wentz has helped out with some of that, so we really appreciate you there.
Totes.
Yay.
And Party of One. You can start downloading it and subscribing on any app that you use for podcasts right now.
Party of One, Maffick Podcasts. Check it out.
Welcome back to Left Bitches, everyone. We are accompanied today by the one and only Miko Peled, author of The General Sun and Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation Thrive. We continue with another week with discussion on Palestine as Israel relentlessly continues to impose terror on the Palestinian people through brute force and even bombing despite a ceasefire. But I think we wanted to begin our discussion today. For those of you who don't know, Miko was born in Jerusalem. So I think we wanted to first ask, how did you become an anti-Zionist?
Ooh, wow. That's a big question.
It's a loaded question.
Boom, right off the bat. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'll give you a short answer because the long answer is very long, and that's why there's a book.
Yes.
Because the General Sun, that's what it deals with. But, the short answer is that, I was, like you said, I was born in a very, very Zionist family. Very patriotic. My dad was a general. I had uncles who were, and aunts and, people around me growing up who held really important positions in the state and in the founding of the state. So the state and the founding of the state and Zionism were always discussed. These were the most important issues at the dinner table, at family gatherings. That's what everything was about. The state. It's kind of sounds kind of neo-fascist or fascist when you think about it right now when I say it. And the narrative was obviously that the Zionist narrative was the narrative. We're back. We suffered for all these thousands of years. Zionism is saving the Jewish people. Zionism brought the Jews back to life after 2,000 years in exile and the Holocaust. And now, here we are. We have a strong army. We're independent. We're new Jews. We're not these weak, poor, persecuted people. We're tough. We're strong. We're handsome. We're full of testosterone, and we're here to stay. And that's really the way I mean, that's really the narrative. And then at one point, my own personal journey took a turn. My own life personally took a turn, and I chose to begin to meet with Palestinians. And taking that journey, the subtitle of the book, The General Son, is Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. The journey is from the space where the privileged occupier, oppressor, colonizer lives, which is very safe, and the roads are, well paved, and the grass is green, and the water flows, and there's electricity, and you assume you live in a kind of a modern Western state, developed state, into this other space where Palestinians live, which is completely, completely different. And then meeting Palestinians and understanding the huge disparity that exists between the life, the way I grew up and the way people like me live, and the life, the way it is lived by Palestinians. And then talking to Palestinians and so forth. So really, that was the turning point. Meeting Palestinians, visiting the Palestine part of the country, and then gradually realizing that the entire country is Palestine. There's no such thing as Israel outside of occupied Palestine. All of Palestine is occupied, and there's no such thing as settlers, separate from the rest of Israel, because all of us are settlers. All of us live in illegal settlements. There's no really difference whether we live in one part of the country or another. It's all really the same story. It's all the same reality. So that was kind of that was the process.
Super interesting. I'm wondering, what exactly was that turning point that, got you to, or motivated you to actually reach out to Palestinians and to meet with Palestinians after living for much of your life, having not interacted with them?
Yeah, well, sadly, the reality is that when we make enormous shifts like that in our consciousness, it's usually as a result of something terrible. We rarely do it willingly. We rarely do it without being thrust into it. And in my case, my sister's little girl, Smadar, was killed in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. She was 13. It was September 1997. And it was a bit difficult time. I mean, there was a lot of violence going on then. Interestingly enough, Netanyahu was prime minister then as well. And several things happened as a result of that. First of all, he was prime minister, and typically the prime minister comes to visit when the victims of things like that. And he called and he was told not to come because my sister, her husband, the family held him responsible, because it's the occupation, it's the oppression, it's the way Palestinians are being treated that leads to tragedies like this. And then the way my sister kind of handled it and dealt with it, and the comments she made, like when people asked her about retaliation and so on, she said, well, don't talk to me about more violence. No real mother would want to see this happen to another mother. That really helped to propel me in that in this particular direction. And I began, and really, you can't just go back to life the way it was after an event like that. Everything changes. You can't help it. And so me and several other members of my family kind of took this direction of engaging, because, to me, it was, if we stop to think about it, we say bombing, we say, suicide bombing, we say things like this, but we never really stop to think. 3 young men decided to take their own lives in a very violent way while taking the lives of other people. If we stop to think about just that for a moment, that's got to force us to do something, to investigate, to learn more about what happened. How does that happen? And the only way to do that is to engage. And the only way to do that is to reach out to the other side, and not as a colonizer, and not as an occupier, and not as someone who comes with security and guns and, jeeps and whatever, but just as a human being into that other space to say, or not really to say, but more to listen. So that's what I was able to do. And thankfully, the Palestinians that I met, first here in the US, actually, because I met Palestinians in the US before I met Palestinians in Palestine, even though I grew up in Jerusalem. And then the Palestinians in Palestine were actually very gracious, I have to say, considering my background, considering the enormous contribution that my family had made to their displacement and to their condition. They were extremely, and still are actually, very, very welcoming and gracious, even though they have no reason to be. So that kind of allowed me to go from one side of the spectrum all the way to the other side very, very slowly, kind of like a baby learning to walk, but feeling safe that I could take that journey. So it was really thanks to the Palestinians I knew and I know today that I felt safe in making that journey, and I reached, the conclusions and the life that I reached, which is the life I lead today, and the conclusions that I believe in today.
Yeah. Well, I've seen you speak in person, and I obviously was blown away by your story, and I am interested in how you came to those conclusions. I've heard you advocate for a one-state solution, for BDS, and how did you get there? I mean, you told us how your views transformed over time, but what led you exactly to get to these specific conclusions? Why no two-state solution? Why aren't you holding on to, the facade of liberal Zionism or anything of that sort?
It's not a loaded question or anything.
It's not that the questions are loaded. It's just that they require really long answers, which is fine. I'm happy to. You guys don't mess around, obviously. No, it's a really good question. I actually remember the moment I realized that the entire two-state solution paradigm was a lie. And once I reached that conclusion, then of course, there's only one conclusion left. I mean, if that is a lie, then what's left is living in a single democracy with equal rights. I mean, and why not? So it was the same moment that I reached these conclusions, and it was 2005. And I was told by some activist friends that there's this small village in the West Bank, and a bunch of guys there have started this new form of protest where every Friday they march, and it's kind of a nonviolent, as a principle, and it was called the Popular Resistance Movement, and it started in Bil'in, and then it went to Nabi Saleh and several other places. And so I called one of these guys. And I met with Muhammad al-Khatib and Iyad Burnat, who maybe you've heard of them. They were kind of the ones who initiated part of that group that initiated this in Bil'in. So I drove to meet them. Now, I'd never driven into the West Bank before. And I rented a car, an Israeli car with Israeli license plates, and they told me where to go. They gave me directions over the phone, and I'm like, I'm driving, no big deal. And as soon as I got off the main road and into these windy roads full of potholes that are so typical of the West Bank kind of rural areas, I began to, like, the sweat and the fear and the demons and just the thoughts of, this is my last day on earth were really, really powerful.
Wow.
And I talk about that in the book. I mean, I describe it. I've driven there 1,000 times since then, and it's beautiful roads, hills covered with olive trees and stuff like that. But then I got there and I met those people who were there. And interestingly, just a side note, Iyad Burnat, this is today, his two sons have just been arrested a couple of weeks ago. Maybe you've seen some of the stuff on social media. I remember those boys when they were too young to come to the protests, and their dad would tell them they have to stay home. And they'd stand up on the roof and look at the soldiers and kind of, say all these things because, he said, you're staying home, you're not coming, because they're too young. Now these guys are in the Israeli prison in Jerusalem being tortured for weeks.
Jesus.
But anyway, So I met them, and what we did was we walked from Bil'in to the settlement that was being built on Bil'in's land, which is called Modi'in Elite. It was a city that was built for ultra-Orthodox Jews. And there was no wall. The wall hadn't been completed yet, so you could just walk right through, back and forth. And we walked, and it was, they were not allowed to do this. I was they were taking me, even though they were the ones taking the risk. But when we got there, I looked around and I saw this massive city. I don't know why, but I think when people say settlements, we often think of a little small town or a village or a farm. Yeah, massive city, enormous apartment, skyscrapers, apartment buildings, condominiums, highways being built, schools, a shopping mall. I mean, we're not talking about a small thing. We're talking about a permanent investment of billions and billions of dollars to build this. And I looked around and I thought, this isn't going away. This is never going away. This is here to stay. The entire two-state solution is built. The entire premise of the two-state solution is a Zionist premise that is allowing Israel to take more and more and more land, and then blaming the Palestinians for not having a solution because we would, but you can't talk to these people. And meanwhile, we'll build, and one day we'll fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't invest billions of dollars and then one day it's not going to happen. And then I looked at these guys and the Palestinians that I knew, and I said, wait a minute, why are we separating ourselves from these people? What is this nonsense about two states? What is this nonsense about separation? Why, we need to have a single democracy with equal rights. We need to respect their rights. We need to give them either their land back or pay them or give them some of these something, work out, the kind of proper compensation and reparations, if you will. And then I came back to the US and I wrote an article that I'll never forget. I called it The Answers Have Changed. And then I was very proud of myself because I got a call from Ali Abu Nima, who asked me to publish it in Electronic Intifada. It was the first time I spoke to him. And I thought, well, if Ali Abu Nima approves of this article, I must be doing something right. I obviously respect him greatly. But so that was the moment that I realized that's it. The two-state solution is nonsense. And the title for the article, The Answers Have Changed, I took from a story you may have heard about Albert Einstein, where he was planning to give an exam to a class, and his assistant looked at the test, and he said, but professor, you already gave this class this test. And he said, but the answers have changed. And so the answer used to be a two-state solution, a peace between Israel and Palestine, which is really this liberal Zionist mush, which has absolutely no foundation, no basis, and no intention to actually, and nobody ever intended for it to actually happen. The newer answer is we need a single democracy. We need to bring down the Zionist state and put together a real, and allow for a real democracy with equal rights to take its place.
Miko, I also wanted to ask, I understand that you were in Jerusalem pretty recently, and I kind of just wanted to ask a little bit about your experience there, given the most recent events with Palestine. Has anything changed? Is it more or less the same as it has been as long as you've been there? Give us a little bit of what you experienced while you were in Jerusalem.
Well, both in Jerusalem certainly, but throughout the entire country. And yeah, you're right. I was there in May. I went there right in the middle of the the Palestinian uprising on one hand, Israeli bombing on the other, the Tel Aviv airport flights were not flying to Tel Aviv, so my flight was canceled. I went through Jordan, crossed overland. It was quite an ordeal. But things never stay the same there. People use the term status quo a lot. The Zionist takeover is rapid and violent. And the intent to get rid of as many Arabs, many Muslims as possible, particularly in Jerusalem, as quickly as possible, it's always been there. They've ramped it up recently. but it's always been there. I mean, the issue of Sheikh Jarrah, for example, that neighborhood, I remember going to protest there 10 years ago at least, to stand with the Palestinians and support them. I know I have friends who live there in that street in Sheikh Jarrah where all the violence is taking place. Their home they're being slated for eviction August 1st. It's a couple they're older than me. The wife grew up in that house. The two professors, I know that, but they taught me Arabic actually at Al-Quds University. The nicest, beautiful house, wonderful people. And across the street, of course, settlers and all the worst type of, Zionist, supremacist, violent, horrible, racist people across the street of taking over the homes. This particular neighborhood is very interesting, the Sheikh Jarrah, actually. It's got a lot of historic significance. Sheikh Jarrah, there's a mosque there that was built on the grave of Sheikh Jarrah, who was the doctor of Salah ad-Din. So it goes back, 1,000 years. And then there's the Dar al-Tifl al-Arabi, which was built as an orphanage and a school for the children who survived the massacre of Dir Yassin in April of 1948. And the Husseini family has institutions there, and they're like an important Palestinian family. So it's not just any neighborhood. It's culturally significant. It's historically significant. They want to wipe it all off, get rid of these beautiful homes, get rid of this really beautiful neighborhood, and build high-rises for settlers. And the settlers that take over the homes once the Palestinians are evicted are not people who live there. These are not like families who want to live in the neighborhood. These are paid, settlers who just reside there to have a presence in these homes. They don't really live there. They have homes elsewhere. Their families are elsewhere. They just take turns and shifts in staying there and causing trouble and provoking. And the street has been blocked by Israeli armed, heavily militarized Israeli police. It looks like Hebron. It's never been like that. I used to go there a lot. So it's really quite terrible, and worse than it has been. But they've ramped up the speed and they've ramped up the violence with which they're taking over. On the other side of Jerusalem, on the other side of the old city, is this neighborhood of a city of Silwan, or the town of Silwan, which is right outside the old city. There too, you see more and more settlers, more and more Israeli flags, and that's a town of some 50,000 people. It's right outside of the old city. It's a huge community, and settlers are taking over. Homes are being destroyed. They've got all these ridiculous archaeological digs that are ruining the homes. And in between sits the old city. And every time you visit, you see more Israeli flags, more settlers taking over Palestinian homes. And Palestinians are being thrown out, kicked out very, very rapidly. And the intent is to gradually rid the city of Palestinians, rid the city of its historic Arab and Muslim heritage, and at the end, destroy Al-Aqsa and build a Jewish temple, or what they call a Jewish temple. In other words, we saw the attacks in Al-Aqsa during Ramadan. That was crossing a line even for Israelis, even for Zionists. And they crossed the line. They knew they were crossing the line, and they did it with purpose. With the hopes, I am guessing, that fire or some accident will happen, and boom, the whole place is destroyed. And what are you going to do now? And then, of course, they move ahead with their plan. So that's one thing that's very, very obvious now, is that they've ramped it up. They're speeding things up. The rest of the country, what we saw that was unique to this particular uprising is this unity across all of Palestine and the breaking of all the barriers that Israel created. So the West Bank is not historically a part of Palestine. Israelis drew it when the state of Israel was established as a border. The Gaza Strip, the same thing. There's nothing there naturally. They just drew a line on the map and created this area so that they have a place to push Palestinian refugees into, hundreds of thousands of refugees in the early 1950s. So these are not natural. But Israel created this identity. There's a West Bank identity. There's the Gaza Strip identity. There's a Jerusalem identity. And then there's the identity of what they call the 1948 Palestinians who are citizens, who have Israeli citizenship. All of this was completely stripped away.
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians everywhere rose and protested. Palestinian flags were seen everywhere. And the protesters were very young. This was a new, younger generation, under 20-year-olds who were in the streets, who were putting up the Palestinian flags, who were uniting, who were coordinating with each other, in all the different parts of Palestine. That was, I thought that was wonderful to see it. It was unique. Of course, they paid a heavy price. Israel arrested over 3,000 Palestinian activist citizens of Israel. Many of them were actually arrested after they were beaten by Israeli mobs, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that was unique, and I think that is irreversible. This breaking of the barriers, this Palestinian unity moving forward is irreversible. And also there was massive support for Hamas, massive support for the bombing, for the rockets shooting of the rockets shooting out of Gaza, massive support. Because what Israel doesn't want people to see is that there's a connection. When you attack Jerusalem, Palestinians in Gaza see it as their city, see it as, Al-Aqsa is their mosque. Israelis like to create this impression that these are separate and these are separate and these are separate. This bombing is here. These people are here. It's not. It's the same people. It's their country. It's their city. These are their monuments. And so that was made very, very clear by the Palestinians, which I thought was excellent. And also, I was sitting in Jerusalem while all this was taking place. By and large, for Israelis, nothing was changed. People sitting, having coffee, going running, going jogging, going to work. Kids are going to school, watching TV at night. Like there was really nothing, you couldn't tell that less than 100 kilometers away, Israel was, slaughtering people. Israeli warplanes were slaughtering people in Gaza. So that's the reality. That was kind of the takeaway from this particular trip.
So this particular instance feels a little bit different. Feels like there's at least more public recognition or international support for what's going on in Palestine, as you say, too, within Palestine itself. Over the years that you've been having these conversations with people, have you noticed a trend of maybe people being more open-minded about what's happening to Palestinians, or about questioning Zionism, generally speaking? How's that looked for you?
Where are you asking specifically? I'm curious, Greg, because that's a really interesting question. Are you talking about in the West? Are you talking about in the U.S.? Or are we talking about like more of an international perspective? It's a really, really good question. That's
a point I had.
Is the public conversation changing?
Yeah.
Well, the public conversation has been changing gradually for a very long time. I mean, I think the credit for changing the conversation, particularly, well, actually all over the West, really, I think the credit goes mostly to student activists. Mm-hmm. SJP, I think, and groups like SJP have completely changed the conversation on Palestine in this country. And they brought it to a place that I don't think anybody 10 years ago or even 5 years ago could have anticipated. If we have members of the Senate, members of Congress debating whether or not to send money and weapons to Israel, even if it's a small group of them, that's unprecedented. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for the really courageous, incredible work that's done on campuses by these, very, very young people, very dedicated and young and brilliant and courageous people, that would never have happened. I think their contribution to the conversation is I don't think they even appreciate, how important their contribution has been and how the effect that it's had. So yes, we see these conversations, but then once they start to pick up, we have people say, yeah, but you know what? We need to tone down the rhetoric. We've gone too far. And it's almost like they're waiting for the next attack. And then they're waiting for the next attack. And people, this time, everybody saw this. This time the protests around the world reached numbers that were unprecedented. But it took over 200 people to be killed for this to happen. That's too late. To stand up and protest after Israel killed all these people is too late. We should have saved them. And I think the connection that people miss is that there's nobody else but us to stand for the Palestinians. Nobody protects Palestinians. Palestinian children in Gaza have no one to protect them. I mean, the Sixth Fleet is in the Mediterranean. They could come and impose a no-fly zone over Gaza and provide humanitarian aid immediately, right? They don't do that. So there's no one there. Palestinians, well, throughout all of Palestine, have no access to water, medical care. Israelis get great medical care whenever they want. Palestinians don't have that kind of access, even the citizens of Israel. And on and on and on. Palestinian activists can be shot and killed. Their kids can be arrested and tortured. There's no one standing up for them. You know, if any Palestinian activist gets killed tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. We'll remember them. We'll make some posters. There'll be some stuff on social media, and that'll be the end of it. There's not really going to be any impact. No one is protecting Palestinians but us. If we wait for the next attack in order to stand up and protest, now we've missed the bus again. We were late again. The point is to stop it before it happens. And that's, I think, the missing link. This is a link that people don't get. There's no one coming to save Palestine. It's us or nobody. There's not going to be an American president or a British prime minister or God knows who, Salahuddin, somebody who, you know, on a white horse. That's it. There's nobody coming. It's us or nothing. And Palestinians, we're all they got. Of course, they do everything they can, but they're fighting they're fighting a fight that they can't win alone. They can't win it alone. So I always look at these protests and I'm saying, yeah, it's great that all these thousands of people are standing up, but where were we a month ago before these 200 people were killed and before all the people that were killed since then? Because it didn't end, like you were saying in the introduction. It didn't stop. The people are still being killed on the streets of Jerusalem, and Hebron, everywhere.
Yeah. Where are we all today? Right. We're waiting for the next outbreak. Right. There's a ceasefire, and all of a sudden the protests stop, and we get quiet. And it happens every time. It's cyclical. Yeah. Really frustrating. So what do we do? What's the, I mean, aside from continuing to talk about it on our podcast and sharing memes, like beyond that, what do we do when there is this ceasefire and everybody gets quiet? What are the action items? What do we tell our friends to do?
Well, I would say two things. Number one, in 2005, Palestinian civil society gave us all a gift. You know, it's this. I wear this pin. This is the gift. It's a very precise roadmap telling us what we need to do in order to support Palestinian rights, in order to bring about justice for Palestine. Now, I believe that every person of conscience needs to stand up and oppose Israel, needs to stand up and oppose Zionism. Every human being that has a conscience needs to do that. And Palestinians gave us a gift. In other words, told us what we need to do. So it's really not that hard. Now, people look at BDS, and a lot of times the first reaction is, oh my God, it's so extreme. Oh my God, it's anti-Semitic. Oh my God, you know, I'm not sure boycotting works, and I don't know if sanctions are a good idea. Okay, everybody take a seat. Palestinians have told us what they need us to do. They are the ones who are occupied, oppressed, being killed. They know what they need. Now, if we just want to wear Free Palestine t-shirts, kufiyas, and go on marches a couple times a year, that's one thing. But obviously, it's not getting us anywhere. We need to be part of the resistance. We need to join hands with the resistance. We need to be the resistance. Now, we're not in Palestine. Palestinians are doing everything they can and anything that's possible from within. They can't do it alone. The odds are against them. So we want to spend all of our time arguing if BDS is good or bad or smart or anti-Semitic, or do we want to get to work? I say let's get to work. Now, people think, oh, okay, so if I don't buy Israeli avocados, is that going to, free Palestine? Well, no, but that's a good step in the right direction, right? and dates and hummus and whatever the hell else, and and the BDS website has all the campaigns. But you could also go to the store that you shop at and explain to them why you're not buying Israeli products and why they shouldn't be selling it, and then you can start a campaign. If you're not comfortable with that, fine. You can start, buy it. There's so many great books out there. Get a couple of books and share them and have a book club and talk about Palestine and invite the writers. All the writers are happy to do Zoom and whatever. We need to build this I don't like calling it a movement, but we need to build the community so that there's no place that Israelis can come. There's no place that an Israeli soldier, an Israeli general can come to and feel comfortable in this country. There's no place that an American politician can claim to be a Zionist and get away with it. There's no place that academics, artists, anybody who represents the state the state of Israel can come and feel comfortable or welcome.
I stand with Israel because of our shared values, which are so fundamental to the founding of both our nations.
Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist.
I believe the bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable.
And my father pointed out to me I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist, for I am.
And we can never let anyone drive a wedge between us.
Israel is essential to the security of Jews worldwide.
They need to know that they're isolated, they are shunned, they will be shamed, they will not be welcome. Nothing is going to change until it all falls apart. Nothing. Bombing of Gaza and the siege is going to continue. Thousands of political prisoners are going to stay in jails. Young Palestinians are going to be tortured in prisons and in dungeons. Palestinians are going to have lack of water. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. These incredible monuments that still exist in Jerusalem and many other parts of the country, they've already been destroyed. Because Palestine has a glorious history of over 1,500 years of Arab and Muslim rule. I mean, it's gorgeous monuments and cities and so on. A lot of it's been destroyed, but in Jerusalem, a lot of it is still there. That is going to go away. Churches, mosques, cemeteries, it's all going to be wiped out, and they're going to build all this other stuff. So, we need to be there. We need to take a stand, and we need to stop it. It's only going to be us. Now, BDS is extreme. How would we know? What are the parameters? Let's see what the demands are, right? I mean, they didn't just throw out an idea, you guys need to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions, but they gave very clear demands. Now, when we look at these demands, I don't think you could come up with more reasonable, sensible demands. They're all already sanctions by international law. So ending what's called the military occupation. So there's no really West Bank anymore. It's just all part of the country, but there are pockets in that area of what Israel calls problematic populations. And these problematic populations live in this area called Judea and Samaria. And they live basically in enclosed areas, in prisons, in ghettos, very large ones. Over 3 million people living in these ghettos, surrounded by checkpoints and Israeli settlements. So ending the military occupation, that's been sanctioned by international law. I mean, there's a consensus. Almost every government in the world talks or says, or at least claims, that that's part of their foreign policy, ending the military occupation. Then allowing the refugees to return. Resolution 194 that calls for the return of refugees, the UN resolution, is the most, ratified resolution in the history of the United Nations. And there's a great book that talks about that. It came out about a year ago. It's called Palestinian Refugees in International Law. And it talks about their case and just how strong the Palestinian case is, the refugee case. But that's, refugees should have a right to return homes. Why are they being held? Why are so many millions of people being held languishing in refugee camps? Why can't they go back to their homes and their land? And equal rights. I mean, equal rights is how what's extreme exactly, what's radical exactly about equal rights. So I mean, these are the demands: ending the military occupation, allowing the refugees to return, and equal rights. Those three demands will repair the three major issues that were caused, the three major problems that were caused Palestinians as a result of the creation of Israel: the refugees, the occupation, and the apartheid regime, the lack of equal rights. So these are measured, these demands are measured, they're sensible, they've already been, like I said, sanctioned by international law. But, Chuck Schumer and people like that say that it's some kind of secret, secretive anti-Semitism or something. The discussion goes in all kinds of weird places. So we need to understand that we're talking about the need to free people who are being killed. Never mind, our tax money, $4 billion of our tax money goes there to do this. But everybody can participate in this resistance. Again, whether you buy or don't buy an avocado could be one thing, but there's so many things that you can do. And American politicians need to understand whether they're running for school board or for national office. Being a Zionist has no place in politics, has no place in America. There should be zero tolerance to Zionism. Zero tolerance to Zionism. You want to know what to do? Palestinians have given us a whole roadmap.
We've talked about that a lot on this show, about the need to separate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and how strong people have worked, how hard people work to keep that connection strong. How do you personally deal with that when you visit with somebody, say one-on-one, to try to help them understand that those are not the same thing?
I find it extraordinary that people even think to conflate these two things. There's nothing Jewish about Zionism. Orthodox Jews have considered Zionism to be their main nemesis. Zionists, if you read the things that the early Zionists said about Jews, today people would be afraid to say 1/10 of that, to express the hatred, the contempt for Jews that all the major Zionist leaders, use, the racist characteristics, the slurs. Nobody would say that today openly about anything, about anybody. Certainly not about Jews. To somehow conflate the rejection of a racist, violent ideology with anti-Semitism, it doesn't even make sense. I mean, it doesn't even compute. How do you, it's one of these crazy arguments that the Zionists throw there in order to throw us off the conversation. It's an absurd proposition that anti-Semitism, that opposing Zionism is anti-Semitic. It's an absurd proposition. It's an absurd idea. I don't really think it deserves a response. It's so absurd. It's so despicable.
That was really beautifully said.
Yeah.
Well, I think, are we approaching time soon?
Yeah, I have one last question, and that is,
Ryan.
What do you make of this new Bennett regime? Netanyahu is out as prime minister, and Naftali Bennett is his successor, and a lot of people who I think are incredibly naive and or dishonest are trying to frame this as some sort of win for justice. So what do you make of that?
Well, I'll quote Ali Abunimah again. He said, they changed the executioner. What do we care? As victims, it makes no difference to us. So they took one, this guy's getting a break, and they brought in a relief executioner. And I really think it's a relief executioner. Netanyahu is not gone by any stretch of the imagination. This new government is barely holding on. They don't have a majority. And what they've done, because it's this real strange alliance between political factions that oppose each other, they have a right-wing agenda, obviously, but the right that supports Netanyahu is not going to support them now. So they're not even going to fully be able to accomplish their own right-wing agenda, because Netanyahu is going to make sure they fail. because the only thing that matters to him, and quite frankly to most politicians, is the seat, is the position. So he doesn't care if he takes the house down with him, but he will do everything he possibly can to go back to that seat, and I think he will succeed because they cannot function. There's no way that they can function. Like I said, they have no majority. They won because of one Palestinian member of Knesset decided to abstain. So it was a 60-59 vote in a house of 120 seats. Yeah, what did I say? 60-59, yeah. And that one, who knows, that one or somebody else may decide, they have to pass laws, they have to legislate. They can't do anything. And my guess is that much sooner than most people anticipate, Netanyahu's promise to come back will be, will materialize, and he will probably head a government that includes all of those people in some kind of what they call a national unity government. That's the only way they can function. Their agenda is all the same. And so the fight is who gets the seat in the chair. He's the only one that has a chance to actually sit there and function. And I think that that's exactly what's going to happen. But in terms of seeing this ridiculous, right-wing militant government as anything but that, is, like you said, either naive or disingenuous or stupid.
Plenty of room for that.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, Miko, I gotta say this was a really special time for us. You're like, Ryan and I constantly watch your videos, and we really admire the tenacity and persistence that you've maintained throughout the years. Because I imagine you face just unprecedented backlash from the Zionists, and I mean, I'm sure the state of Israel doesn't make your life easy as well. So we really thank you.
Well, let me reply by saying thank you guys. It's really fun hanging out with you guys and chatting. And, if there's one thing I cannot say is that I am suffering or getting death threats or any of that kind of stuff. That would be not true. I've made much more friends doing what I do than I've ever had before. And really great people like yourselves. And so I get to hang out with. So it's really not a sacrifice. But thanks for saying all that. I appreciate it. It's very sweet of you. Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miko.
Really, really nice.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
it. Thank you for your work.
See you soon.
Sounds good.
Bye, Miko.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. The Left Bitches are Anissa Naue, Erica Marable, Ryan Wintz, and Amanda Getty. Produced by Gregory Haddock with music by Jonathan Hurley. Check us out on patreon.com/leftbitches for same-day release, bonus episodes, and more.
I was prepared by God for this work.
Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power.